The asteroid has struck, the dust has settled, and humanity is left picking up the pieces. Except this time, it's us who are the dinosaurs. You know, large, flightless birds with tiny arms that will go extinct in 66 million years? Okay, maybe we don't have it quite that bad, but life as we know it was definitely thrown into chaos when an asteroid, it's roughly 7 miles or 11 kilometers wide, slammed into Earth, bringing an end to the age of dinosaurs. But there were winners, too. Small mammals who would go on to fill many niches left open by the sudden disappearance of dinosaurs and give rise to, well, us. But what if there had been survivors? What if some creatures so perfectly adapted to their environment were able to persevere through all manner of disasters, both natural and human-made? Let's take a look at the top geographies that would likely still be inhabited after the apocalypse. Welcome to my channel. Today we're looking at apocalypse after the eruption, the dinosaurs that survived. We're taking a look at where critters would likely still be found if an asteroid struck today. There have been several studies on how the Chicxulub asteroid impact, which killed off most dinosaurs and 75% of all species on Earth, would affect our world today. And while some of these reports make for grim reading, focusing on the devastating effects such an event would have, others focus on the potential for pockets of habitable environments to persist long after the dust had settled, pun intended. A 2020 study published in the journal Quaternary Science Reviews assessed the global impact of the asteroid strike and the subsequent wildfires that raged across the continents. Their conclusion, the extinction event would have only wiped out about 2/3 of species worldwide, with some habitats much more affected than others. So let us dive into 2 of those habitats and see what sort of critters might still be found there. No, 1, the United States, or more specifically the Great Plains of the US. When it comes to post-asteroid survival, no place does it better than the Great Plains. Why? Well, thanks to its vast stretches of grasslands, the interior of the U.S. continental landmass would likely escape much of the worst of the dust cloud that would block out the sun and cool the planet, while areas closer to the equator and higher altitudes would experience less drastic temperature changes. The Great Plains would bear the brunt of the impacts of the wildfires that would rage across the landscape. In the immediate aftermath, however, any survivors would have little to worry about. See, unlike, say, London, England, which would face catastrophic fires following the asteroid's impact, the Great Plains would largely avoid large-scale conflagrations, according to researchers. The thick vegetation and continuous fuel source of the forests in places like eastern North America would lead to almost total deforestation. The Great Plains, on the other hand, would largely remain intact. Some pockets of trees would obviously be lost, but the habitat overall would remain stable and offer plenty of opportunity for small animals seeking refuge from the devastated landscape outside. A 2023 paper published in the journal PNAS, however, paints a somewhat grimmer picture for the Great Plains and the critters that would call them home. The study focuses on the impact the asteroid strike would have on insects and whether any would survive the ecological fallout. The authors predict that while insect extinctions would be widespread, as insects adapted to warmer climates such as those found in the Great Plains would fare better than their cold climate counterparts. They estimate that between 30 and 50% of insect species would go extinct, but that the impact wouldn't be uniform. There would be winners and losers. The good news is that insects in the Great Plains would probably do, since they'd already be living in what would become one of the last warm refuges on Earth. And no, too, the United Kingdom, that's right, Great Britain, would be another great place to be if the asteroid struck today. But why? It may seem surprising given the UK's close proximity to Europe, which would almost certainly be devastated by the impact. But according to research, the UK would fare better than most places on the continent. Like the Great Plains of the US, the UK is pretty far from the projected impact site, which could explain why it would likely be spared much of the worst of the initial blast. Also, because of its relatively high latitude, UK would also be spared much of the worst of the dust cloud that would block out the sun and cool the planet. The country's weather would become more like that of Siberia. It's not exactly prime real estate after an apocalypse, but the UK's chances are much better than those facing mainland Europe. See, unlike the Great Plains of North America, the UK wouldn't face massive wildfires in the aftermath of the asteroid's impact. Researchers say that Western and Northern Europe would be hit hard by wildfires that would flatten much of the region's forests. This would obviously decimate any native species unable to flee to more remote refuges. The UK would see some wildfires, of course, but they would likely be much smaller and less impactful than what would happen just across the English Channel. So which critters would be able to survive on the Isles? Well, the same ones that have survived multiple ice ages. Obviously, it would be devastating, but some animals would undoubtedly survive the impact and the subsequent fallout. Mammals such as red deer, Eurasian lynx, red foxes, European badgers, gray wolves, and wild boars would all likely find themselves better positioned to survive the apocalypse than their counterparts on the European mainland. These hardy animals are already well adapted to surviving in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, and they would likely fare well in the UK after the asteroid struck. But the UK isn't just home to hardy mammals. Thanks to its numerous islands and relative isolation, the British Isles are home to many unique species of reptiles and amphibians that can be found anywhere else in the UK. For example, Anglesey, an island off the northwest coast of Wales, is home to the rare smooth snake. And the Isles of Scilly off the southwest coast of England are home to the equally rare sand lizard. Both of these reptiles would likely fare well in the aftermath of the asteroid strike, provided they were able to avoid being completely wiped out by the initial impact. They were already well adapted to survive in sometimes drastically changing conditions and should have little trouble adapting to whatever comes their way. Where do you think would be the best place to be if an asteroid struck today? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps the channel and allows us to keep making videos. If you want to learn more about what would happen if an asteroid struck today, I've got 2 more videos right here you can watch next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.